Okay, great. So welcome everyone. It's our pleasure to welcome Tomas Veloz from Center Leo Apostel at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels from Belgium and originally from Chile, talking about reaction networks and evolutionary game theory and complex systems. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really flattered to have been invited to speak at this very nice institute. So quick introduction about myself. I'm currently a postdoc at this center. Do you see my mouse, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm currently a postdoc at this center. I also founded a research center which also does some social impact projects and technological development. It's a foundation, a non-profit called Foundation for the Interdisciplinary Development of Science, Technology, and the Arts. And it's based in Santiago, Chile, and my country of origin. And the work we are doing now, and which is very much related to this article that I will show today, or the research that inspired this article. Now this work is funded by the John Templeton Foundation, and if we have some time, I will speak a little bit about that in the end. But let's move then to the topic of the talk. So, as mentioned, reaction network modeling of complex systems, and then applications in an application in evolutionary game theory. And as I said, the topic of this project is the origins of goal directedness, which is a kind of complicated question at the age of epistemology and also biology a lot, but more maybe agency and all these deep questions of science. Modern science, I think, very relevant today. So, okay, the outline of the talk is I will start first speaking about interdisciplinary modeling, the idea of modeling interdisciplinary systems, a question that today is becoming more and more relevant, of course, because of like the data age that we are living on. And then a little bit of complex systems, then how to express complex systems as reaction networks, and formalizing or giving some kind of basic ideas of how to do models with reaction networks, and some examples beyond biochemistry, very briefly, so we can focus more on the specific application in evolutionary game theory. So that will imply to find new meanings for what species and reactions are, and then show what this type of approach is capable of doing, at least at first sight, because this work is kind of a first application of reaction networks in evolutionary game theory, which later on the group kind of split out and we move everybody into different things, but having this this call and the fact that we are doing this project now makes excellent timing to go back to this. So very nice that this is happening. So now the introduction, the things to know in modern or in this century's science, the things to know, the objects of scientific inquiry, are probably gonna be more and more interdisciplinary complex systems. Interdisciplinary, of course, is a cultural subjective view that we, from the scholar world divided in faculties and departments, conceive as interdisciplinary, but that's the idea of saying interdisciplinary, something that can be thought from the side of a mathematician or a biologist or an engineer or an artist or a social scientist, etc. So, but these are the type of things we probably will start having to focus more and more on in the future. Like, for example, global warming, and the Nobel Prize in Physics this year was really cool, that was given to complex system people, and also working with interdisciplinary frameworks like global warming is not just about climate, it's not just about biosphere, not just about industry, business, politics. So the problem is that for interdisciplinary systems, we are doomed to understand them from a fragmentation given by perspectives. So we have to look at the complex system from perspectives. And then the question, epistemological question, is how can we represent or model an interdisciplinary complex system? So then I make this very, very simple model of the world. Like if we want to model something, this is very abstract. I'm not doing models at the moment. It's an abstract thinking representation. So we have the industry, for example, the urban system, and the financial system. So we have that all these three things are interrelated, but even more, not necessarily so simply like this one affects that one and the other affects that one, but actually the interrelations are more complex than just like arrows. They are contextual arrows. So the effect of, for example, the industry in the urban system is contextualized by the financial system. And the same happens for the other two. So it's not just like a simple arrow, and that's where we start going to reaction network modeling. We need to take into consideration the context at which the interaction is taking place. So other elements are in play when we look at the relation between industry and urban systems. And those, the state of those also matter. So it's a simple arrow, it's kind of too little to represent, not just in industry, in ecology, and in many other kinds of systems. So, and also we have other disciplines, other areas of influence, like politics or well-being or biodiversity, for example. So if we want to make an open, comprehensive picture of the world, we might probably have to involve all these things somehow we need to get all these things involved. So the disciplines imply some sort of modularity in the representation. That's something we can kind of infer, and that there is some sort of self-organization of all these modules that we observe as elements of reality. There must be some sort of self-organization, or we can claim that makes emerge the state or the system that we see. So each subsystem has its own rules, but all these things are integrated and create a meta system where these little modules that we explained from the disciplines are just parts that are totally interrelated to the others. So this is more or less like the basic general view of how to start thinking of interdisciplinary complex systems. Now, to go a little bit more in detail on what complex systems are, it seems that the audience here is probably more expert than me on this, but I will just mention some salient features of complex systems that I think that kind of map through what we minimally need to focus on to develop or to question how to make models. So complex systems are composed by many entities of possibly different nature interacting in many generally contextual ways. That's something that is a good start. And the features that these complex systems exhibit normally are not altogether present in traditional scientific objects. So this is, of course, a matter for another talk. This is just introduction. But the idea is that we need to understand these features and how they come about. And so systems thinking epistemology, this is the way more or less that I call it. We need to start understanding how to integrate all these ideas in an operational framework so we can make models where these features are very clear, are not model dependent or are not simulation dependent, that we can conceptualize them properly to start thinking in these terms. That's basically the full idea. So I hope it's clear. Contextuality normally means complexity. Feedback, it's the second important property that we find in complex systems that implies regulation. Then from the feedbacks altogether, all the interlocking of feedbacks creates self-organizations, which is the co-regulation of the parts. And these co-regulated wholes, co-regulated parts become stable wholes. And then the emergence is the idea that these wholes become or can be observed as entities themselves, not anymore as co-regulation of parts, but as whole themselves, which can also interact with other wholes, which are in turn co-regulations of other parts. So this implies that we immediately understand that complex systems form hierarchies of meta-systems. So we have like the fundamental entities that create meta-systems. These meta-systems interact, creating other meta-systems. So I think that for this audience, this is kind of trivial. But if there is any question, you can, of course, let me know if not, something is not clear. Now, how do we model these types of systems nowadays? What are the paradigms to represent these things? The dynamical equations I call just in a general sense, I mean stochastic or discrete or continuous equations. So we basically identify certain variables that they are interrelated, and we make a model of how these variables evolve in time. That's the dynamical equation approach from an abstract perspective. Of course, there are many ways, and there's a lot of work on this. I'm not disregarding or neglecting this, but that's in the general idea. The network approach, we establish some sort of relatedness between the variables, and we make a topology. So the topology can be studied itself, or we can deduce dynamical equations from it. And that's then we go back to dynamical equations analysis. So it's a reinforcement of the dynamical equations by topological studies, or we can even do topological studies without the need of equations, just for example, like centrality or clustering techniques or stuff like that, which is typically network analysis. And we also have agent-based models. So we start from little entities, little beings or little agents in the general sense, and we establish rules that define their time evolution. And from the time series we obtain from these systems, we can then analyze that and obtain some properties. So if we think of these modeling tools, they are extremely powerful from a simulation point of view. We can handle all the interesting, all the defining features of the complex systems as we defined it just now. So large size, we can handle all that because we have powerful computers nowadays. So because we have powerful computers, all these features can be very well captured by these approaches. So that's what we, so far, it's currently done in science for complex systems. Of course, we all rely on this, and of course, we should not stop doing that. But if we think from a conceptual point of view, not from a simulation point of view, but from a conceptual point of view, these features are not these features are not well defined so far. So every model, every system has its own form. I will briefly, very quickly, just go through this. For example, the large size, very, very large systems, we have that dynamical equations can somehow model them, but it becomes very complex, and we need to rely on methods and techniques and that are parametric sensitive, for example, extremely parametric sensitive sometimes, or we don't even know how if there will be parametric sensitive or not. So the large size can be handled by dynamical equations to some extent, so not entirely from the conceptual perspective. Networks can handle large size systems, and agent-based models can handle large size systems. The contextuality, for example, in the case of networks, is not really easy to handle, because if you define an arrow, a type of arrow to represent a relationship, like, for example, friendship on social media, and then you have another arrow that represents not friendship, another relation, like, I don't know, something like maybe not friendship, like the opposite, or colleagues, for example, colleagues. Okay, so you have friends and you have colleagues, but then these two types of arrows establish two different types of relations. So, but how do you connect the one type of arrow with the other? Is not in principle in the language of networks. So you just represent the network through one relation, through another relation, and then if you want to integrate these two types of relations, you need to make an ad hoc assumption, which is not in the language of networks themselves. So that's what happens, for example, as well in ecology, where you establish, for example, food webs, where people establish food webs, and food webs, okay, this eats that. But then you have another web of cooperative relations. So this cooperates with that. And we have another network for, I don't know, parasitic relations. This is a parasite of that. But then we find that all these networks are relevant, but how to integrate these networks in a single model is not given in the language of networks. For example, but agent-based model can handle this very well with rules and so on. But then when we look to these other properties, feedback, self-organization, and emergence, we start finding that even though at the simulation level this is completely doable and we can get the data and find that, a description, a definition that comes straight from the modeling language to the concept is not necessarily always found. It's not clear how to do. And if you look at different authors or different approaches, you will find different definitions. And the typical, the most, I go to the red concepts now, resilience and evolvability, which are actually not clear even how to define them. So of course there are analyses and we can find a lot of literature for that, but there is not an ultimate theory. And you find, or we find, there are a lot of complaints in the literature that we lack of a theory of multidimensional assessments. That's how it is normally called by the big scientists requesting more funding or thinking about this. You can find the articles in, for example, in the case of ecology, this is very, it's claimed a lot in ecological letters and like the most important article journals. They speak that there is not an integrative language to speak about, to model ecological systems. We can keep trying with networks and with agent-based models, but we still do not have an encompassing definition of what will be resilience or what will be sustainability. So the same happens in economics, sociology, and so on. And so the point that I want to make here, and of course it's debatable point, is that we lack a theory to think about, and for that we need a language first to speak about complex systems thinking. So we need something like, it's a language that allows us to think properly, to play language games in the sense of Wittgenstein for complex systems. So this is kind of like the big call. And then the proposal, I jump straight on it, like just for the sake of time, is that using the biochemical language as a generative paradigm, because biochemistry is the generative paradigm of nature, we can just look at that language and try to see how far we can get with that. So I quickly here explain or describe why this language encompasses all the features of complex systems that we were kind of describing before. So the contextuality is in the happening of reactions. So it's not the same A plus B goes to C plus D than A plus B go to A plus C. Well, I will explain this later. Sorry, just to move forward. But the idea is that molecules break apart or join, forming novel molecules. So the molecules coming together is a contextual process. So each molecule has its own evolution, but happens in the context of interacting with another molecule. And of course, there are metabolic processes, cyclic, productive, and destructive processes. So we have feedback, that's very common. So the cell or any organelle, it's a stable in space-time structure. So there is self-organization in biochemical systems, of course. And we know that they give rise to the emergence of life and emergence of lots of processes. So evolvability of life is, it's also possible because we can obtain mutation and selection processes out of this language. So in principle, this I put this picture from the Center of Chemical Evolution, which shows like how we get to complex life out of, you know, the different steps of life evolution. So it's then very interesting to conceive this as a language. That's the point. This is a language. It's not just about chemistry. That's the idea. So then artificial chemistry should be or could be a language to represent complex systems. Then I quickly jump on artificial chemistries, which is defined by this triplet: set of species, set of interactions, and the algorithm describing how the reactions are applied to the molecules inside the vessel. And you have many choices to do this type of models. You can have an explicit set of species, a finite set, or you can have a sort of grammar definition, which allows an infinite amount of species. So you can tell, okay, all the species having this type of symbolic structure, like AB, AAB, ABA, or something, combinations, and then patterns of combinations will be valid as species. And then you have explicit reactions in the case of explicit molecules, explicit species, like the one here, or implicit by using this star object, which is just a pattern, any pattern. The pattern will be repeated. So you can allow for infinite rules in this way by just skipping what the pattern is, and that is the infinity, is encoded there. So for the algorithm, the algorithm is it's how the rules come about, how they happen, and this is very similar actually to an agent-based model, indeed. So that I don't claim total incompatibility between these two languages, artificial chemistries and agent-based models. Maybe artificial chemistries are a subset, an implementation of agent-based models, but the perspective I think that artificial chemistries have is different in principle. And to make the point clear, I will work with the simplest case, which is the one I've been developing so far anyways, which is finite species and explicit interactions. So the explicit case only. And the algorithm describing the interactions will be just taken straight from chemistry for those who know mass action kinetics. So I will not dig into the potentialities of using other kinetics or infinite species, because I just haven't worked on that yet, but I think it will be highly interesting to do in the future. So now coming to the reaction networks framework. I'm sorry for those who know all this, but it's interesting maybe to get to know this from this other kind of approach, from coming to this from this other angle, which is the modeling of complex systems. And interactions are represented by the reactions, which are of transformative nature. So molecules of hydrogen and oxygen become water, and there are other species that can interact with the same species that are interacting in other ways. So it's why it is called network, because The species can act as reactants or as products, depending on the reaction, and they can act as reactant or as products in multiple reactions. So this network is quite causal. I didn't show any loop, but in typical biochemical modeling, there are loops, there are cycles, there are catalysts, and there are the systems are open even. So we have inflow and outflow of species. So all that can be taken into consideration. So again, just going more in detail on the features that this can be a modeling paradigm for complex systems, is that different to graphs, we can totally have that A interacting in the context of C, it's different than A interacting on its own, evolving on its own. So the relation between A and B can be made different in the context of C or without C as a context. So this changes the language very quickly. It's something that to me is very deep and not so, I will say, not people haven't paid much attention to this deep, to me deep difference. Another important thing is that reaction pathways can be used to represent complex interaction mechanisms. So so reactions are like simple interactions can be reactions, but then pattern or sequences of reactions can encode complex interaction mechanisms, which a simple arrow again will not be able to grasp. And also in an agent-based model you will find that, but I haven't seen so far, myself at least, I haven't seen that agent-based models focus on finding or developing a theory of how these patterns of interaction produce certain features. Maybe I haven't found it, but I don't think is the common approach. The common approach, I think, is to take agent-based models, simulate them, and then get the data, and then associate parameters to overall behaviors, but not to study the topology of interactions, which is a very standard way of studying reaction networks. And also the self-production models or represents a circular cause-effect loop, which is known for those that do not, I also will not speak much about that at this part of the talk, at least. It's called autopoiesis, and it's a concept that is used to define or to find the defining features of living systems. So what separates, what makes the difference between a chemical soup and a living system? And this is the capacity to self-produce through its own operation. So the capacity to self-produce itself through its own operation in an environment, of course. So this is very interesting because it is possible to change the perspective, not looking necessarily at cause effects mechanisms, but at the appearance of self-producing patterns within the universe of discourse, within the thing we are modeling. We do not necessarily will have to find cause effects processes, but instead the emergence or the self-organization of certain substructures. And that's what maybe what metabolic analysis is generally more interested on, more than direct cause-effect relations. And also we have plenty of theoretical tools which have been developed for like 50 years or more, like efficiency theory, chemical organization theory, which I will briefly speak about, structural kinetic modeling, and for process optimization we have a lot. There's a lot of. So I don't. We need there will be need of an institute to put all these things together. Like it's not a one person task. It's a very large body of knowledge there. So okay. Of course, reaction networks can also be used to define the dynamical equations. So and many people, of course, the efficiency theory, even it's a way to link the structure and the dynamical system that is associated to the reaction network. So this is kind of standard as well. Just to make this thing formal, we define the set of species as M, and N species and K reactions. So the reactions take multi-sets of reactants and produce multi-sets of products. Multi-set is a vector with positive coordinates saying this is present in this amount. So if all these details are not really relevant for this talk, and we can define a kinetic law, and this is the simple example of mass action kinetics. So for those that do not know, so I have the derivative in time of the concentration of species S1, S2, S3. Concentration is a measure of how much is the species relative to the others, or in absolute value. So it's a sort of population measure, continuous population measure. And then if we assume these three reactions, S1 plus S2 goes to 2S2, S2 plus S3 goes to 2S1, and S1 plus S2 goes to 2S3. So they can all, yeah. So I think obviously I made probably a mistake. This one, yeah, this is repeated. So sorry, this should be S3. S1 plus S3 goes to S2, S2 plus S3 goes to S1, and S1 plus S2 goes to S3. So that's the typical, just everything turns into the other. Yeah, I'm really sorry. But anyways, the equation is right, at least the first one. So if we have S1 and S2, then the happening of this event of S1 getting together with S2 is the product of the concentrations, because mass action kinetics assume that everyone is equally likely to meet with everyone. So and there is no natural attraction or anything special about it. So it's just the product. So the independent event of getting together. And the happening of the reaction, or the success, let's say, or the expected time, there are many ways to interpret the probability that the reaction takes place. There are many ways to interpret this. It's going to be given by this constant. So S1 is consumed by this reaction. So we have minus K1 S1 S2 because S1 is being consumed. But then we find a positive value here because 2S2 is produced. So 2 K2 S2 times S3. So because as I mentioned before, there are some typos here. Not all these reactions, I'm sorry, this equation is not entirely correct here, but the idea is what I said, that the reactants come together, so this plus becomes in the differential equation a product, and then the constant is multiplying, and then it's going to be positive or negative, and the amount depending on how much is it relatively produced. So in this case, in the second one here, get S2 plus S3, S2, S3, and 2 S1 are produced. So this is multiplied by 2 K2. So in this way, we can build the reaction network. And of course, if we have many species and many reactions, this is going to become a very large system of highly coupled nonlinear equations. So something very complicated to analyze and probably most likely without analytical solution. So this method of studying dynamical equations in this way is very useful only for small systems. Then the bigger the system is, the larger, the more complex the system is, the more one has to start relying on simulations. And of course, there are hardcore mathematical methods to do analysis and so on, but still we never get far enough to say we really understand this system when it is complex. So we need to change. That's the point I make, and the point that people in biochemistry have made a long time ago. We need to look for other ways to study the system. So now, how this has been applied, these frameworks have been applied beyond biochemical systems. This was started of, and I need to say this because in some articles I have got kind of comments about it. There are many people who have proposed this in the past. Even Feinberg himself, if you look at the foundational papers of deficiency theory, you will find in the discussion that he proposed that the chemical models could be used to represent other kinds of situations. So I am not the first one proposing this, and the group I work with, we are not the first, but it's interestingly enough, there haven't been systematic efforts to develop the language of reaction networks in other areas. Systematic efforts, only tries. And there is one guy called Daniel Velegol who developed or who rebranded what I will show today as chemical game theory, made a Wikipedia article out of it and so on. So maybe he will make this area successful, because made an article rebranding what I will show today. So it's interesting that these things happen also in science. But anyways, so for non-biochemical systems, Peter Dietrich in the Jena Center for Bioinformatics in Jena, the Friedrich Schiller University, they have developed to me, the first found model of a political system inspired in Luhmann's theory of social systems, which is a theory of autopoietic processes of communication. So he was really looking at the political system. I mean, Luhmann, he's a famous sociologist. For those that are not in sociology or do not know much about it, Luhmann is one of like a major sociologist of these times. His work is from the 90s, and he became very popular because he said that social systems are not made of agents, but of autopoietic processes of communication. And then Dietrich and other people have modeled this doing reaction networks. So they also did a model in 2007 of exchange and trade in global economy. So looking at the economical system, not as a simple graph, but as a metabolic system. So most economists look at economical systems as graphs, but these contextual interactions I was mentioning are not cannot be represented in this way. So we need to make a reaction network, which is technically a bipartite graph for computer scientists. So this is a bipartite graph. So it's still a graph, but it has two different types of nodes, those of representing species and those representing interactions. So it's a conceptually different object. So I also have done, and this is the article I was sharing in the chat, how to model ecological systems, and we have done a little bit of modeling as well of the ecological interactions that do not have a very nice modeling counterpart, such as endosymbiosis. Endosymbiosis is a type of interaction that doesn't really fit traditional paradigms of modeling in the large-scale ecological systems. So we developed a reaction network model of endosymbiosis, and we are working on that as well with my group. Then even to the Gaia hypothesis. So this is a collaboration we did with the guy working with the Gaia hypothesis, that we can think of the whole planetary system as a self-producing reaction network. And the topic of today, which is the decision system, it's the idea is that the influence of agent decisions on each other can be represented as a reaction network. And the interesting aspect, which is going to where we go in the future, is that self-maintaining decision structures play the role of stable coexistence of strategies. So not really, the focus is not going to be in the end in which strategy provides more profit, more utility, but instead on what are, under which conditions, different types of strategies can coexist without necessarily killing each other. So of course, one of them might receive more profit than the other, but at least, but it will also be possible that they coexist. So this changes a little bit the paradigm of studying evolutionary systems, not as one system, like the replicator equation, like the one that gets more fitness, replicates more and kills the other, but also you can look at the other time scales where things tend to stabilize, where things, where not things, I mean, where the types of entities can coexist and form stable structures. So this is a different type of analysis. Okay, so moving to the prisoner's dilemma and the evolution of cooperation, I think this is the typical setting of game theory. So we have different agents having choices. They can make choices, and the choices they make and cannot make them sure of the utility they will get, because they depend on the decision of the other agent. So the utilities become actual when both agents decide what to do. So this is the typical prisoner's dilemma, which you can choose to declare. It refers to two people taken to do different cages, separated from each other, both of them with the police, telling, and each one of them gets told that he and the other guy are going to be sent to prison for a certain time for a crime they might have or might have not made. It doesn't really matter. They are just told this, and they are told that if you declare yourself guilty, you will get, if you declare, well, this is it, here is the years. So if you declare that the other person is guilty, you will get only 1 year of prison and the other will get 5 years of prison. If you declare yourself non-guilty and the other declares itself non-guilty as well, you will get 2 years. And if you declare non-guilty and the other declares you guilty, the other person will get just 1 year and you will get the 5 years. So there is a strong, how to say this, a strong motivation to declare yourself and the other guilty. So you ensure you will not get 5 years in prison. But if both of them declare non-guilty, both of them will get less time, the 2 years. But the problem is that if you declare yourself non-guilty and then the other declares you guilty, then you risk to have 5 years in prison. So there is not much motivation here to declare yourself non-guilty. So I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this very well, but the other case is the same for hunting people, which is this idea was taken to study the emergence of cooperation. So how cooperation emerged. When we cooperate, two people going to hunt, if both hunt in a cooperative way, they can get a very big animal. But if one of them just decides along the way to go and hunt alone and say, okay, I'm just going to save my family here, I'm just going to get a rabbit for myself, I will not be able to hunt such a big animal, but I will make sure I get something. So the person who was trying to find the bigger animal might not get anything, and the person trying to get the smaller animal will get it. So if you are cooperative and people defect to your way of cooperating, then you get nothing and the other gets something, less than if they both will cooperate. So this is structurally the same idea. So the question is, if all the analysis in game theory state that it's best to not cooperate because you can save your basic needs, let's say, that seems to be more important. So how come people, how come we see cooperation in nature? If all the analysis we can do, and I will show briefly later how do we recover these results, how cooperation evolved, how cooperation emerged. And then this was studied by the evolutionary game theory, which is playing this game repeatedly. So we make a world of agents, we made them interact, and they can cooperate or defect, get payoffs, and then see which type of thinking, which type of attitude will become more profitable in time. Because of course, if we have a lot of people cooperating, they will all get a lot. So defectors are not efficient in a highly cooperative. Well, I will explain that, but for example, we can see that cooperators are very ineffective in a world of defectors. Defectors can really harvest a lot out of cooperators, but if they get caught, then they get nothing. So it's an interesting interplay how cooperations and defections evolve and change. So this is the classic paper that explains how what mechanisms could have driven the evolution of cooperation, and they explain that it's because of some cognitive capacities that that agents have, like memory, kinship, some sort of recognition at the genetic level, at the social level, and different types of levels of identification that allows to find the cooperators in the crowd and know to which people have to cooperate and to which people have to not cooperate. So what we did was to make a shift here, and I'm sorry because I think I'm taking too long with the introduction. What we did here was to make a shift and say, okay, we have the agents on one world here, and we have the payoff matrix, which tells us what is the payoff of each decision. The payoff is a generalized utility function. It can be money, happiness, whatever. It's just that generalized utility. And what we said is, okay, let's get rid of the agents and just create a reaction network out of the payoff matrix, which represents the interaction of the decisions, not of the agents, following a little bit the ideas of Luhmann. So we create two species levels. One is the decision species that can interact, representing the interaction of two agents, but not of the agents themselves, but the decisions interacting, and payoff species representing this general utility. And so we define gain and loss payoff species. So we got everything in positive units. We can just define that the payoff species could turn negative and will be the same. But just to respect the typical chemical thinking, we assume that there are lost molecules too. So it's just a technical decision. And this is the article that we developed here, explaining how a payoff matrix can be used to create a reaction network, making this metaphor, let's say. So the point of defining decision and payoff species is inspired, as I mentioned before, by a Luhmann approach to social systems, he claims, I just rephrase his book, in one sentence, but like the idea is to say, it's not agents' behavior, but visible communication dynamics what determines social systems phenomena. So we study the social system, or the decision system in this case, at the level of visibility of decisions, not at the level of agents' behavior. And that's the idea, to skip the agent from the system. What is the good of this? We avoid all the complications of having and defining agents. We can, for example, neglect that they are in space. So this can simplify computationally the simulations, or there are goods of skipping the agent from the system and just focus on what really matters, which is the decision dynamics. We need to encode this decision in agents' brains because we assume that they come from them, but we can technically skip the agent. Another good thing is that the interaction tendencies can be parametrized. So we can define the types of interactions, and we can parameterize the tendency for one interaction to happen or another. So this is not necessarily clear in the evolutionary game theory. You have to rely on space, on movement, on other structures. Here you can simply associate parameters to the interactions, and this might simplify the analysis as well. And the most important to me property is that we can apply self-production frameworks to study large-scale decision systems, because when we have an agent-based model with multiple, like hundreds of types of decisions and hundreds of strategies, it's very little what we can obtain out of a simulation. In the traditional agent-based approach to study, like Axelrod and the guys that have studied evolutionary game theory, that works only when we have 2 or 3 strategies and we can compare one to the other. But if we want to look at large-scale decision systems with maybe new strategies coming in all the time, we need to have a different representation of what's of the object we are studying. So that's why I propose, or we propose with the group, that self-production properties are more important. So, and now the bad of doing this is that decision species have no memory, because we don't have an agent to encode the decision made before. We cannot encode memory directly, but some sort of memory of the decision can be built assuming molecule formation in the sense of implicit species, as mentioned in the beginning, like with this A, B, B, A. So a species can grow in length, so creating a memory. So the memory can be encoded in the structure of the species, but we will not do this today because we are working only with explicit species, not with implicit species which might accumulate memory of what they have been going through in the past. We cannot do agent recognition as well because we don't have agents, but we can do strategy recognition. And this is what I will show very briefly by the technical part of the talk, which comes now. And we have no spatial effects because the decision species, we don't navigate in space at this moment, at least in this model, because we are using mass action kinetics, but we can use metapopulation approaches. And I was just quickly show what a metapopulation model is for those that don't know. So each node here in this metapopulation model this is a graph of relatedness. So the relatedness is the likelihood of one strategy to interact with the other. So we have many strategies. They can also be agents, actually, and we can create connections between the agents. And the idea is that inside the agent or inside the strategy, we have decisions that interact with the decisions of other agents or strategies. So there is an exchange of decisions which change the structure of the strategy itself. And then at each sub entity, we find the decision species interacting inside. So this is like a brain or like a strategy. And then we have many brains or many strategies interacting all together. This is the dream model, but I will not show that. We haven't got there yet today, yet. So instead, I will show just the iterated prisoner's dilemma, which is the simplest possible system. And I simplified it from the article. I made a simplified version with 2 reactions only, where we have the event of 2 cooperative decisions coming together, generating 1 B of profit for each of them and 1 C of loss for each of them, and the cooperator-defector interaction, where the cooperator and the defector decisions come together, generating 1 profit molecule for the defector and 1 loss profit molecule for the cooperator. So this represents the types of interactions. We will not assume creation or destruction of decisions just to have a simple molecule, and we'll make a very rapid payoff analysis. So we can build with the mass action kinetics the differential equations associated to this system. So we see the payoff, the gain and loss, and no change in time of the decision species. So we can calculate a per decision profit indicator. So how much profit are you making per unit of decision? So the molecules obtained for gain minus loss divided by the population or by the concentration of the decision. So that tells you at this concentration, this is the profit per species, per decision species you are getting. And then of course we can define the profit rate ratio and check in the long run of this situation which strategy, which type of decision is more profitable. So this system of equation is simple enough, so we can totally solve it analytically and even obtain an expression that tells us that the cooperation is evolutionary stable, so it creates more profit than the defector's decision, if and only if this inequality holds, where the value of R is defined in terms of the kinetic constants of the reactions and the initial concentrations. So it's very interesting, this aspect, and it's discussed in the paper for those who want to go further, because this is the same expression that Nowak and many others, Axelrod and many others have studied for evolutionary game theory, but now the cooperation mechanism is encoded in the kinetic constant of the cooperators interaction. So it's just the likelihood for cooperators to interact in the same sense than in the other guys, people done in the past, where the cooperation mechanism is parametrized. So just some technical variable rearrangements, and we can restate the inequality. So we can compare with just one parameter, K1 and K2, by saying K1 is PK2 and B over C over B is lambda, so it's the inverse. So we just reparameterize this to make it to have it with less parameters, to have this inequality with less parameters, and then we can plot how this relation goes on. So I will just choose that, for example, that the payoff for cooperation is twice the payoff for defection. So C is half of B, basically. So the C is B over 2 in this case. So we got that this ratio between B and C is 0.5. So between C and B, sorry, the ratio between C and B is 0.5. So that means that that the profit that the defector gets over the profit that the cooperator gets is twice. So the cooperator is getting, when the cooperation occurs, you get twice the profit than when the defectors defect and profit from the interaction. In this case, we can study the invasion analysis. So, for example, there is well, we can see in this analysis that there are two curves. First one is cooperators are invaded by defectors, and the second one is cooperators invade defectors. So when cooperators are invaded by defectors, the initial population of defectors is 10% of the initial population of cooperators. So that's why we get this. And then we find that cooperators will resist invasion only when sorry, and I need to say that this is also taken in the long run. So I made the simulation and took like a long-term values, and then we can see that cooperators resist the invasion of defectors only when from the cooperation mechanism is larger than 2.3 or something, this value here. So from here on, we get that the cooperators will be invaded by defectors. And in the second case, we find that for cooperators to have a successful invasion, we need that their cooperation ratio, so the tendency to cooperate must be very strong. So when the tendency to cooperate is very strong, then they can invade. Instead, when the for cooperators to be invaded, to resist invasion, they need not so much cooperation, which means that this part of the curve shows the cooperation paradox. Actually, this is the thing that shows that, because in a world of defectors, the emergence of cooperation has to be so strong that it's very unlikely that it will happen out of nowhere. Instead, if we will have born in a world of cooperators and defection will have appeared all of a sudden, it will very quickly invade the world of cooperators, because how can I say? Sorry, because for the parameters that help cooperators to resist the invasion require not so much strength. So if you have a majority of cooperators, you can keep cooperation, but in order to bring cooperation in, you need a very strong cooperative effect. So I hope this makes clear that that cooperation paradox can be explained by the result of the reaction network. And then I will quickly move to the second tit-for-tat system. So the tit-for-tat cooperates in its first interaction, and then it imitates the last opponent decision. So we have T, C, and D, TC, TD, and D. Now 3 decisions, not just cooperation and defection, but 3 decisions. And we will not create or destroy decisions, but now decisions can change. For example, this interaction, TC plus D goes to TD plus D plus this profit, means that the cooperative tit-for-tat interacted with a defector, and then it became a decision, a defector tit-for-tat decision. So there is a change in the decision. Since decisions have no memory, as explained before, there are different ways in which we can model this system. I will only focus on the third one, which is the most complex. The other 2 can be found in the article and are not are more like exercises to understand better how to do this kind of models. But the strategy recognition is the interesting one that I will show, that decision agents cannot recognize each other, but decisions can recognize the strategy from which the decision is coming from with some success. So it's like an agent looking at another and knowing, I know what you're thinking, but with some success, or guessing, try to guess and maybe do it right or do it wrong. So P, this parameter P, is the ability of a species to recognize the strategy of the other species. And K is going to be just the probability for happening of an interaction, or the inverse expected encounter time. So then we develop this new reaction network where TC, the cooperative interactions interact. And since both they are cooperative, or it doesn't really matter if they recognize each other or not. So then there is no P involved here. But for example, this one, this second reaction, TC plus D becomes TD plus D. It happens like this because TC didn't recognize that it was interacting with a defector. So that event requires the probability 1 minus P to be multiplying the coefficient of happening, because the probability for this reaction to happen is 1 minus P. Then we have the other probability that it recognizes the interaction with a defector, still becomes a defector, but now it recognizes, so there is no payoff created because it will defect with the defector, so no payoff is created. In this one, there was payoff created for gaining for the defector and losing for the tit-for-tat. So the tit-for-tat here wins profit, the 2 types of profit molecules, and here it only creates losing profit and gaining profit for the defector. In this one, since it recognized that it was interacting with a defector, then no profit is created, but it's still a transformation in the decision because it's a tit for tat who changes its decision after interacting with a defector. Now, the tit for tat.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm not sure if we can skip this bit and go to the insights for this section and maybe conclude, because we're already quite a bit over time.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
Yes, absolutely. I do follow. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So we define this system, and I was just like very quick to very close to close. So as I mentioned before, we grab ideas from metabolic modeling. So instead of focusing on solving the system and doing all the technicalities, we just will find the conditions under which the system can coexist, the decisions can coexist. And this is the idea of organization theory, which I was trying or I would like to show, that you pick the reaction network, you calculate the structural properties and identify which of the green circles here, which of the subsystems are able to coexist. The other subsystems are not able to coexist, and this can be obtained with a simple linear algebraic analysis of the reaction network. So without going to much technicalities, what we find here is that in order to find the coexistence of strategies out of that reaction network, we need to solve a system of equations like this. So this is the decision creation of each reaction, which induce a simple equality. So the rate of change of the decisions will be equal to 0. So all decisions will find a fixed point when the happening of the interactions follows these ratios. And we know from the mass action kinetics that these elements of the happening of the reactions are given by the mass action kinetics. So we can, because we have this inequality, we can plug the values in and find a solution. Indeed, we obtain a second order algebraic equation, which I will not show, but because the decisions are not created or destroyed, we can have one single variable equation and solve it. And for that solution, which is the V star, obtained for the steady state concentration steady state, we can study the profit. So we have now the matrix explaining what the profit is for the stationary regime where all the decisions coexist, and then we can look under which conditions the tit for tat has better payoff than the defector. So so this is an explicit expression for the success of tit for tat competing with a defector, in having, of course, all the assumptions that we made. So just to conclude, now the units of modeling are decisions and payoffs instead of agents. Memory and recognition are modeled specifying different reactions for different cases and assuming like probability of recognition and so on. And we can study invasion analysis by looking at the payoffs, but also we can study coexistence of strategies. And the coexistence of strategies borrow methods from metabolic analysis. So the idea will be to expand on all the other ideas that I mentioned, like complex mechanisms, metapopulations, and other bioinformatic methods. So all this work is now being connected, and this is the last slide, so thank you, by this grant, which I will not have much time to explain, but I invite you to check. So thank you, and sorry for the long talk.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions, if there are any. Yes, I see Peter has a question.
Yeah, so thank you, Thomas, for a very nice exposure of this field. I had a few questions. I mean, I'm not an expert on this type of work, but I am a chemist, and I actually know a little bit about chemistry. So My question is actually, when you actually do this analogy between chemical networks and the application to actually think of, like agents and cooperation networks, you seem to take a few concepts from chemistry, such as the ability to transform species at a certain time scale or in a certain way with certain rules, but you seem to ditch other things. For example, you're not conserving the atom numbers or the mass. This is actually, there's no conservation law. And there's also no things like detailed balance, for example, where you actually have to look at reversible reactions or the forward-backward transformations. You don't seem to look into thermodynamics. So all of these things are lost in the translation, so to speak. So can you actually comment on that, why you do that and what the consequence of that is? Or have you thought of that? So what is the... And so I'm trying to understand why you picked the things that you did, and you ignored other aspects. This is my question.
Yeah. No, it's a foundational question, of course, and very, very nice to answer. So far, what I showed is a description of those features of the chemical language, which are like just the transformative dynamics and the possibility to create and destroy things. But in order to develop a more detailed, like atomic numbers and like structural properties of the species itself, and how the structural properties of the species itself modulate the happening of the reactions or the possible reactions that can happen, and other like thermodynamical aspects and so on, would require a deeper analysis on the species. Like, for example, if I tell what's a cooperator decision, where it comes from, what is the proper, do I have to put inside this molecule a little bit of empathy, a little bit of I don't know, of happiness, or of what is the electron of a cooperation molecule? You see what I mean? So
yeah.
So there is a development of inner structures for the development of a sort of chemistry of a certain domain. So of course, what I showed today doesn't really go there yet. It's just showing that taking the objects themselves as wholes, like the cooperator decision as a cooperator decision, and that's it, without any inner structure, you can still you can advance a lot on that's the idea, that we can advance a lot on the representation of complex situations, having multiple decisions and multiple strategies. So now the question you do is going to the inner structure of them to build bottom up, which is definitely a venue, and it's completely possible to do, but it needs development as well. So this is, for example, that will have to be worked out by psychologists maybe, or in connection with psychologists, to develop a chemistry of decisions, a real chemistry of decisions, you know. And this is a very, to me, it's the way to go. And we are trying to do it more in a more in this sense in ecology. It seems that is easier to express. A species, ecological species, can be the state of an ecological species is not just the population, but also the type. So all the parametric decisions we can make for each type of species, we can. It is possible to represent it in a meta-population model. That's why I started from. I mentioned that because meta-populations allow to define different property states for the species, and then look at the different meta populations. So at each possible atomic number, let's say, of the species in a different meta population and how it will interact. And they can jump from one place to another. So I don't know if this answers your question a little bit, but it's not.
Do you say that you that in the end you're looking for some conservation laws, basically, for some symmetries in the system which are conserved when you actually describe these type of complex networks? That is what you're looking for, because that is actually what the chemistry actually is all about. It's conservation of mass, in fact, and conservation of energy. So that's the so these type of conservation laws should then also, well, apply or emerge in these in these complex networks. Is that what you're after in the end? Because that would actually amount to something like chemistry of these type of.
But I don't necessarily think that information, because we are dealing with information structures here, which will not necessarily conserve the mass. They might create two out of one without any.
Sure, but this will never happen. Okay, but this will never happen in chemistry. So in a chemical network, you cannot do this. So this is a limitation of the chemistry, whereas in the information framework, this is something possible, because information, well, I mean, in quantum mechanics, by the way, it cannot be destroyed or created, but of course here you can create it, because this is an open system. And so I guess this is then the openness of the system is something allowing you to do these type of things. But I think I see your point that it would be great to have chemical rules for these type of systems, and maybe you have them already, but I don't see precisely why you would take this as a starting point. I mean, okay, maybe I'm taking up too much time. I mean, I would love to talk a little bit longer. But okay, one thing that came to mind in me is, I mean, there are other ways of dealing with this. I mean, you already mentioned agent-based modeling, but you also have, for example, just plain old Markov theory or probability theory, which also can deal with these type of things. If you have a number of states and a number of probabilities, and you have interconversions between these type of populations and states, you basically have a Markov state, and that would be sufficient to do exactly what you're doing. But I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Is that true? Or, I mean, do you gain something extra from the chemical network theory? This is not so clear.
Yeah, I see your point. I think that, like, the difference between the Markov approach and the reaction network approach is that the events, the type of events, are of different, in principle, I see them as different nature. In the probability case, you change of a state from one state to another. In the reaction network approach, you have a creation process, a transformation process. It's not entirely the same happening event. And also, I think that the ideas from biochemistry, the ideas related to defining living systems and metabolic system, metabolic analysis, and all these tools can be borrowed directly to learn from this complex system. I presume, I have the impression that these two languages might be mathematically, eventually they might be mathematically equivalent. And this have happened also with other languages. So I do not know if there is a conjecture that you can go and express a certain logical formula which is not expressible in Markov chains or Markov framework, or which can be developed in the reaction network framework. I don't know if there is such a thing, like this language is more powerful than the other. But to me, I think the challenge for these future interdisciplinary models is to be able to think of these things in simple terms, create models. You can get involved chemists or ecologists or psychologists, and we need to have something that they can handle, and their knowledge can be brought in, and this is something that and we need to have also some conceptual tools, which is the other thing that that is necessary, I think, to move forward knowledge creation as a collective. That's the maybe the bottom line.
Okay.
With Markov chain, with Markov theory, yeah, this can be done and people do that, but yeah, I don't really know if there is anything that this cannot be done on the other side. It's an open question. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. And I found it very fascinating. So don't take this as a criticism. It's just
no. It's very important to put this thing in perspective, because that's exactly how science advances. Like,
all right,
okay. That's why I'm here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, and since it's already quite late, and maybe there will be an opportunity to have more discussions at a later stage, I'd like to thank Tomas for the talk, and we can all do that by unmuting and clapping, or just using the reaction. And then